Have you ever considered that the life you long for, the change you crave, the desire you hold so tightly, could unfold in only 3 days? Not years, not months, not even weeks. 3 days. Such is the power of imagination when coupled with unwavering faith. Man believes in delay because he bows to appearances. He worships time as though it were his master. Yet I tell you, time bends to the state you dare to occupy. Enter the end in imagination. Live there as though it were already true, and in 3 days you will see the signs of its unfolding. Why 3 days? Because in 3 days, the seed of assumption takes root. The subconscious, fertile and unquestioning, accepts what is impressed upon it with feeling. It begins to rearrange the circumstances of your life, drawing to you people, places, and events that align with the state you have chosen. The outer world cannot resist the inner conviction. Do not measure by the clock on your wall. Measure by the conviction in your heart. For the moment you feel the reality of your wish, the work is done. You may sleep, you may walk, you may wait, but the state has already been planted. And like the seed that bursts unseen beneath the soil, so will your desire break forth into visibility. So tonight, take the bold step. Assume the wish fulfilled. Feel it real. Walk in its joy, sleep in its embrace, and dare to persist for 3 short days. Watch then as life bends itself to your inner vision. For truly, it only takes 3 days. Transformation can happen in just 3 days when you shift the inner state you occupy. For the moment you dare to assume a new reality, the unseen begins to move on your behalf. Time is not the obstacle you believe it to be, for it bends and reshapes itself according to the conviction you hold within. In 3 days of sustained faith, of living as though your desire is already true, the subconscious accepts the new impression, and life starts to rearrange itself to reflect it. What once seemed distant can appear near, for change responds to imagination. Time is not the master, imagination is, for time only reflects the state that you dare to occupy within yourself. The world has taught man to bow before the clock, to measure his progress by days, months, and years, believing that delay is natural and inevitable. Yet imagination stands outside of time, creating instantly the pattern of life that later becomes visible. When you assume the feeling of your wish fulfilled, you are not waiting on time, you are bending time to your conviction. The outer world is simply the shadow cast by the inner state, and shadows cannot dictate to the light from which they come. If you believe change will take years, you will bind yourself to years, but if you dare to believe in the immediacy of your imagination, the change will reveal itself swiftly and unexpectedly. The imagination is the eternal now, untouched by delay, untouched by appearances, untouched by reason. Time is only the stage upon which imagination projects its play, and the role you assign yourself within imagination will inevitably manifest upon that stage. To make imagination the master is to free yourself from the tyranny of waiting, for what you feel inwardly real must find its expression live in the end, as though your desire is already true. For the secret of manifestation is not in longing, not in hoping, but in assuming the feeling of fulfillment here and now. When you dwell in the end, you claim the state as yours, and the subconscious accepts it as fact. To live in the end is to walk, speak, think, and feel from the position of already having what you seek. It is not to look forward to it, but to look out from it, as though the desire were the very foundation of your being. Most people remain in the state of wanting, praying as beggars instead of creators, pleading with life to change rather than declaring it already done. But when you assume the end, you no longer ask, you embody. The feeling of fulfillment becomes your inner dwelling place, and what you continually occupy inwardly must express itself outwardly. Just as a seed planted in the soil knows only how to bring forth after its kind, the assumption held faithfully within you has no choice but to externalize. To live in the end requires persistence, for appearances will tempt you to return to doubt. But appearances are shadows, and shadows cannot dictate to the light. If you remain faithful to the end you have claimed, the world must eventually conform. You may not know how it will happen, for the ways and means are never your concern. Your only task is to sustain the feeling of being the one who already has, already is, already lives the desire fulfilled. In doing so, you call the unseen into form. And life reorganizes itself to mirror the truth of your inner conviction. 3 days is enough for the subconscious to accept a new state, because the mind does not require long years of effort to be transformed. It requires only sustained focus and conviction impressed with feeling. The subconscious is not a judge. It does not weigh time, logic, or appearances. It only accepts what is impressed upon it consistently. When you dare to hold to a new assumption for 3 days, living as though it were already true, you begin to saturate the inner depths of being with a fresh reality. In this short span, the new state is no longer a fleeting thought, but a living condition that the subconscious accepts as natural. The first day of assumption may feel strange, for the old state still seeks expression. But when you persist and refuse to return to doubt, you impress the new seed. By the second day, the conviction grows stronger, and the subconscious begins to loosen its grip on the former identity. By the third day, the new state feels familiar, as though you have always been that which you now claim. The subconscious, once impressed, immediately begins to move all things necessary for the outer reflection to occur. It is not time that produces the change, but intensity and faith. The subconscious responds not to words but to the feeling of reality, and once the feeling has been sustained for 3 days, the impression is deep enough to override the old pattern. The world may not instantly reveal the fullness of this shift, but the signs will begin to appear, for the seed has been planted and the process is already underway. To give the subconscious 3 days of unwavering conviction is to give it the power to construct the conditions of your desire without resistance. Therefore, do not believe that transformation requires endless effort or long seasons of waiting. 3 days of faithful living in the end is enough to establish a new foundation. The subconscious does not measure by the calendar, but by the state you occupy. And once it accepts the state, the outer world must conform. What you dare to assume for 3 days, you set into motion with irresistible power. Feeling is the key that plants the seed of manifestation, because imagination without emotion is a shadow without life. But when clothed in feeling, it becomes substance and reality. The subconscious does not respond to empty words or idle thoughts. It responds to the mood that accompanies them, the deep sensation of already being or having that which you desire. When you feel your desire as real, you impress it upon the fertile soil of the subconscious, and like a seed planted in the ground, it begins to grow unseen until it blossoms into visible form. Thought may suggest, reason may argue, but only feeling carries the authority to move the unseen forces that shape your destiny. To plant the seed of manifestation is not to repeat affirmations mechanically, nor to wish half-heartedly, but to enter the state emotionally. To surrender yourself fully to the conviction that what you want is already yours. Feeling is the bridge between the invisible imagination and the visible world, and every outer event in your life is nothing but the harvest of feelings once planted within. The subconscious does not question whether the feeling is born of truth or fantasy. It only knows to bring forth in the likeness of what it has received. When you dare to feel rich, though appearances scream of lack, you have planted the seed of wealth. When you dare to feel loved, though you may sit alone, you have planted the seed of companionship. When you dare to feel successful, though failure seems to surround you, you have planted the seed of triumph. The outer world is merely the field in which these seeds bear fruit, and in due season, you will reap according to what you have sown in feeling. Many fail because they continue to dwell in the feeling of want, believing that wishing alone is enough. Wishing acknowledges separation, but feeling acknowledges possession. The man who feels his desire fulfilled no longer begs, he lies from the end, and the subconscious cannot resist this command. The moment the feeling is accepted, the process is set in motion, and the outer world begins to align itself to match the new state. Feeling is the secret doorway into creation, the living substance that transforms imagination from a passing image into a law-compelling reality. Just as no seed can grow without being planted in soil, no desire can manifest without being planted in feeling. It is the depth of the emotion, not the length of the effort, that determines the speed of manifestation. When you hold a feeling with persistence, it becomes the atmosphere of your being, and life must conform to it. Feeling is the language of the subconscious, and once it is spoken with conviction, the world has no choice but to echo it in form. The outer world must reflect inner conviction, because the visible realm is nothing more than a mirror of the unseen states man dares to occupy within himself. Every circumstance, every relationship, every condition you call reality is born first in imagination, sustained by belief, and revealed through conviction. The inner state is the seed, the outer world the harvest, and no harvest can appear that was not first planted within. To attempt to change the world while neglecting the inner state is to labor in vain, for shadows cannot be altered without altering the light that casts them. Conviction is more than thought, it is the deep acceptance of a state as natural and inevitable. When you are convinced inwardly, you cease striving outwardly, for you already feel yourself to be the one you wish to be. That inner acceptance impresses itself upon the subconscious, and the subconscious, being the creative power, must project it onto the screen of space. Life has no choice but to bend to the conviction you carry, for the world outside is obedient to the command within. Man often looks at his environment and declares it proof of limitation, not realizing that his conviction of limitation is the very cause of what he sees. If he would dare to withdraw attention from appearances and fasten it upon the conviction of fulfillment, the outer world would swiftly rearrange itself to match his new state. The law cannot fail, for the outer is compelled to echo the inner. Consider the man who walks with the conviction of success. He does not wonder if opportunities will come, for he already feels himself successful. His manner, his speech, his confidence radiate that inner truth, and life responds by opening doors, arranging circumstances, and drawing to him the recognition that matches his inner certainty. Contrast this with the man who doubts, who carries the conviction of failure. Though opportunities stand before him, his fear blinds him, his hesitation repels what could be his, and the world reflects back to him only the poverty of his inner state. Conviction does not come from effort, but from dwelling in imagination until the state feels natural. The moment you feel at home in the end you desire, you have impressed the subconscious, and the reflection must appear. Just as a seed does not struggle to grow, but unfolds according to its nature, so does your inner conviction quietly yet powerfully manifest without strain. The outer world is not separate from you, it is yourself pushed out. To quarrel with it is to quarrel with your own reflection. The wise man turns inward, assumes the state he wishes to see outwardly, and waits in confidence, knowing that the law will not return void. Conviction held within is destiny, and nothing in the outer realm can resist it. The moment you anchor yourself in the inner reality of already being, already having, already living the desire fulfilled, the world must shift to bear witness to that truth. For the outer world has no voice of its own, it only speaks the language you have whispered in silence to yourself. Do not watch the clock. Trust the feeling, for time is not the power that creates, it is merely the stage upon which creation appears. Man has been conditioned to measure progress by minutes, hours, days, and years, believing that the fulfillment of desire is bound to the ticking of the clock, yet imagination stands outside of time and shapes it according to the conviction you carry within. To watch the clock is to doubt, to anticipate delay, to bow to appearances. But when you release yourself from the tyranny of time and anchor yourself in the feeling of the wish fulfilled, you have already entered the reality you seek, and the outer world must eventually conform. The feeling is the true measure of creation, for the subconscious does not keep calendars or watches. It responds instantly to the state impressed upon it. If you persist in the feeling of already being the one you long to be, the subconscious accepts it as fact, and the law of life begins to unfold it. You may not see it the same hour or the same day, but that matters not, for once the impression is made, the result is certain. To watch the clock is to uproot the seed, to disturb the process, to weaken your faith by asking, when will it happen? But to trust the feeling is to let the seed remain, knowing that its growth is sure though unseen. Consider the man who plants a tree. He does not return every hour to dig into the soil and check whether it has sprouted. He trusts the process, knowing that the seed has its appointed season to break forth. So too with your desires. The moment you feel them real, they are planted in the soil of the subconscious. And though you cannot see the inner workings, life is already in motion to bring them to light. The man who obsesses over the clock delays his own harvest, for he remains in the feeling of waiting, and waiting only multiplies itself in his experience. But the man who trusts the feeling lives already in the end, and his world must echo that state with precision. To trust the feeling is to walk by faith, not by sight, to rest in the unseen certainty that what you feel within will harden into fact. Appearances may contradict you. Delays may seem to linger, but these are shadows with no substance of their own. The only substance is your inner state, and if you remain faithful to it, the shadows must eventually bend. The moment you check the clock, you return to the old state of lack. But when you rest in the feeling, you remain in possession of the desire. Time is the servant of imagination, not its master. When you dare to assume the end and sustain the feeling, time will reorganize itself to bring you the people, circumstances, and events necessary for fulfillment. You may call it coincidence, chance, or luck, but it is simply the law unfolding in perfect order. Trust the feeling, and you rise above the anxiety of waiting, for you know that you already hold what you desire within. The difference between those who succeed in manifesting and those who struggle is this: the successful ones refuse to watch the clock. They know the outer world is but a reflection of their inner state, and once they have entered the state of the wish fulfilled, they allow time to serve them. They remain calm, steady, and convinced, while others rush, worry, and doubt. Trusting the feeling is the act of letting go, of surrendering appearances, and of resting in the inner conviction that creation is complete. Do not watch the clock, trust the feeling, for the clock is powerless without your attention. But feeling is the living force that commands the unseen to take shape. What you dare to feel inwardly real must appear, and it will come not according to your anxious watching of hours and days, but in the perfect and natural unfolding of life that answers conviction with expression. Once assumed, the desire is already set in motion. For assumption is the creative act by which unseen reality begins to crystallize into form. Nothing in life occurs without first being imagined and felt, and the instant you dare to accept your desire as already fulfilled within, you give it life in the only place where creation truly begins, the inner world. The outer world, no matter how solid and immovable it seems, is but a shadow of the inner conviction, and once the inner state is changed, the shadow must rearrange itself to reflect that change. When you assume the wish fulfilled, you are no longer seeking, no longer begging, no longer doubting. You are living from the position of already having. This shift is subtle yet profound, for the subconscious mind, which is the builder of your world, does not recognize wishes or hopes. It recognizes only states. The moment you assume a new state, the subconscious accepts it as fact, and from that moment forward, everything begins to move to express that state. This movement may be invisible to the eyes at first, just as a seed growing beneath the soil gives no immediate sign. Yet the process is as certain as the law of seasons. Once assumed, the desire is already set in motion, because the law of life knows no delay. The creative process is instantaneous within, and the appearance of time in the outer world is merely the unfolding of what has already been decreed in imagination. Man frustrates himself when he demands instant visible results, forgetting that the invisible work is always the foundation for the visible harvest. The assumption is the planting, and life itself guarantees the growth. To assume your desire is to clothe yourself in its reality, to speak, think, and feel as though it were already true. This is not pretending in the shallow sense, but inhabiting a state so fully that it becomes natural to you. The subconscious, once impressed, will begin to shape your thoughts, reactions, and even the circumstances around you to align with that state. People will appear, opportunities will unfold, and events will conspire in ways you could not have orchestrated with reason alone. This is why assumption is the key, for reason deals with the seen, but assumption deals with the unseen cause. Once assumed, you need not concern yourself with how it will unfold, for the how belongs to the unseen intelligence of life. Your task is not to manage the outer world, but to remain faithful to the inner state. To doubt, to question, to look anxiously for signs is to uproot the seed, but to rest in the conviction of the assumption is to allow it to ripen in its perfect season. Just as the farmer does not tear open the earth daily to check whether the seed is growing, so too must you trust the unseen process once the assumption has been made. Every outer fact you now experience was once set in motion by an assumption, whether consciously or unconsciously held. Many live in states of fear, lack, or failure, continually assuming the worst and thereby setting into motion conditions that mirror those states. Yet the same law that brings forth fear will also bring forth fulfillment when a higher assumption is chosen. The law does not discriminate, it only reflects. This is why vigilance in assumption is so vital, for once a state is accepted, its motion cannot be denied. To live wisely, then, is to assume deliberately, to enter the feeling of the wish fulfilled, and to remain there until it feels natural. The outer evidence may lag behind, but it cannot resist forever. For the world has no choice but to express what has already been decreed inwardly. Each assumption carries within it the power of fulfillment, and once released into the subconscious, it moves with certainty toward manifestation. When you understand this truth, you cease chasing results and instead rest in the knowledge that the assumption is the seed, and the seed knows how to grow. You no longer live in anxiety, wondering if your desire will come, for you know that the moment it was assumed, it was set in motion. You live with quiet confidence, knowing that life itself is your servant, shaping circumstances to reflect the conviction you carry within. Once assumed, the desire is already set in motion, and nothing can prevent its unfolding except your own return to doubt. If you persist in the end must reveal itself, for assumption, sustained with feeling, is creation itself. The world will bend, time will shift, and all things will rearrange themselves to reflect the state you have claimed. Creation is finished, and your assumption is the key that unlocks the door to its expression. Persistence for 3 days activates the unseen process, because the subconscious mind, though instantly responsive to impressions, requires a short span of consistent conviction for the new state to become natural and unquestioned. The first contact with an assumption may stir the imagination but often feels fragile, as if it could easily dissolve under the weight of appearances. Yet when you return to the end again and again, holding firm in the conviction of already being, already having, already living in your desired state, the seed of imagination takes root. 3 days of persistence allows the old state to loosen its grip while the new state begins to dominate consciousness. And once it feels natural, the unseen machinery of life moves with certainty to bring it forth. The number 3 holds symbolic power across time because it marks completion of a cycle, the beginning, the middle, and the end. In the work of manifestation, 3 days of persistence symbolizes this cycle of acceptance. On the first day, the assumption is planted. The imagination, infused with feeling, delivers the new idea to the subconscious. On the second day, the battle between the old and new may arise, as appearances tempt you to abandon your conviction. Yet when you persist, refusing to yield to doubt, the seed remains undisturbed. On the third day, the new state begins to feel natural, as though you have always been what you now assume yourself to be. At this point, the subconscious accepts it as fact, and the unseen process begins to move. Persistence is the secret, for a single moment of assumption may inspire, but sustained assumption engraves. The subconscious mind, though never questioning, needs repetition infused with feeling to override the habitual patterns of the past. Just as a groove is carved deeper each time it is traced, so too is the new state etched into consciousness when you dwell upon it with conviction. 3 days is not a prison of time, but a symbol of the depth required to make the new state dominant. Once it is accepted, it continues to express without effort, for the subconscious will carry forward what has been impressed upon it. To persist for 3 days is to withdraw attention from appearances and give it wholly to the end you wish to experience. You do not beg for change, nor do you argue with the evidence of the senses. Instead, you quietly, faithfully, and deliberately assume the feeling of the wish fulfilled. You live from it in imagination, and you allow that feeling to saturate you until it becomes more real to you than what your eyes behold. In doing so, You shift the balance of power, and the subconscious begins to move unseen forces to reflect this change. Many abandon their assumptions because they demand instant results. They look to the outer world for proof, and when proof is delayed, they return to doubt. But the law is honoring, and delay is not denial. The seed cannot be forced to sprout in the same hour it is planted, but if left undisturbed, its growth is inevitable. 3 days of persistence is the discipline of faith, the willingness to remain loyal to the unseen long enough for it to take root. Consider the man who assumes wealth though his pockets are empty. On the first day, he may feel the thrill of imagining abundance. On the second, doubt may whisper that appearances prove otherwise. But if he persists, refusing to be moved, by the third day the feeling of wealth begins to feel natural. His inner conversations shift, his confidence rises, and life responds by opening doors that were invisible before. The unseen process was activated the moment he persisted beyond the reach of appearances. Or consider the woman who assumes love though she sits alone. On the first day, her heart may leap with the joy of imagining companionship. On the second, loneliness may press heavily, tempting her to believe she is still without. Yet if she persists, by the third day, she begins to feel cherished and complete within. Her countenance changes, her actions align with her inner state, and soon life reflects this new conviction. The unseen process is always faithful, for the world has no choice but to mirror the state impressed upon the subconscious. Persistence for 3 days does not mean straining with effort, but resting in faith. It is not endless repetition of words, but quiet dwelling in the feeling of fulfillment. It is choosing, again and again, to return to the state you desire, until it becomes the air you breathe. The unseen process does not need your struggle, only your loyalty. Once the subconscious accepts the state, it sets into motion all that is necessary, and circumstances will rearrange themselves in perfect order. When you understand this law, you cease to measure by the clock. You do not ask when it will come, for you know it has already begun the moment you assumed it. You no longer chase signs, for you know the greatest sign is the feeling itself. You no longer worry about the means, for you know life will provide them. Your only task is to persist in the state until it feels natural, and 3 days is enough to make the shift from wishful thinking to living conviction. Persistence for 3 days activates the unseen process, because it seals the new state into the subconscious and frees you from the grip of appearances. It is the bridge from imagination to manifestation, from unseen to seen, from desire to fulfillment. Once the state is impressed, the law moves silently, irresistibly, and faithfully. For what is assumed with feeling must one day be expressed in form. Life reorganizes itself around the state you dare to occupy, because the outer world is nothing but the projection of the inner state you consistently assume as true. The conditions you experience are not random accidents, nor are they determined by forces outside of you. They are reflections of the conviction you hold within yourself. For imagination, when accepted with feeling, becomes the blueprint by which the unseen arranges every circumstance of your life. The moment you dare to enter a new state, you set into motion a chain of events that cannot be reversed unless you abandon that state. Life, being obedient to the inner command, reshapes itself to echo your assumption, and the people, opportunities, and even seeming coincidences that appear are but the outer expression of your inner choice. When you live in a state of lack, life reorganizes itself to confirm scarcity. Opportunities are missed, doors seem closed, and you continually encounter situations that reinforce your belief in limitation. But the moment you dare to occupy the state of abundance, life reshuffles itself. Ideas come, new avenues open, and resources begin to flow from unexpected directions. The difference is not in the world itself, but in the state you bring to the world. For the state determines perception, and perception determines experience. Every state is a complete world within itself, containing its own patterns, moods, and outcomes. When you step into a state in imagination, you are not merely daydreaming. You are aligning yourself with an entire reality that must eventually be externalized. The state of love carries with it experiences of companionship, warmth, and harmony. The state of health carries vitality, strength, and wholeness. The state of success carries confidence, recognition, and achievement. You cannot dwell in one state and reap the fruits of another, for life only brings forth after its kind. To occupy a state is to choose the world you will inhabit, and life faithfully reflects that choice. The reorganizing of life often appears subtle at first, for the shift begins within. Your reactions change, your thoughts are lifted, and your inner conversations align with the new state. From this change in consciousness, the outer events follow. What once seemed impossible suddenly becomes natural, not because the world has changed on its own, but because you have dared to see and feel from a new perspective. The people you meet are drawn into your orbit by the invisible law of attraction, operating through assumption, and even those who once seemed indifferent may now treat you differently, for they can only mirror the conviction you hold about yourself. Life has no power of its own apart from the state you embody. It cannot act independently, for it is always a servant to imagination. This is why Neville Goddard insisted that man must stop trying to change the world and instead change the inner state from which he lives. If you attempt to rearrange circumstances without altering the state that produced them, you will find the same patterns returning again and again. But if you dare to step into a higher state, the world must bow to it, for the outer is compelled to obey the inner. The daring is essential, for many hesitate to assume the state they desire. They wait for evidence, they seek permission from appearances, and they cling to the old state out of habit. But the law demands boldness, for only when you fully occupy the new state in feeling does life begin its work of reorganization. To half believe is to remain divided, and a divided state produces no lasting result. To dare is to cast aside doubt and to live, even if only in imagination, as though the desire were already accomplished. This daring act of faith is the spark that sets life into motion. Once you have dared to occupy a new state, persistence is the key. The old state will call you back through appearances, but appearances are shadows without power of their own. They are merely the residue of past assumptions, fading images that linger until replaced by the new. If you remain loyal to the new state, refusing to be swayed by the evidence of the senses, the reorganization of life accelerates. Events shift, circumstances align, and what once seemed fixed becomes fluid, for the world cannot resist the pressure of a sustained inner conviction. Imagine a man who has long lived in the state of failure. His posture, his speech, his expectations all reflect this conviction. Life mirrors it by presenting continual setbacks, disappointments, and closed doors. One day, he dares to assume the state of success. At first, it feels unnatural, as though he were pretending. Yet he persists, night after night, imagining himself celebrated, accomplished, and fulfilled. By day, he chooses to walk in that confidence, even when outer evidence seems to contradict him. Slowly, the inner shift begins to show outwardly. His manner changes, people respond differently, opportunities appear where before there were none. Life has reorganized itself around his new state, and success becomes as natural to him as failure once was. Or consider the woman who has lived in the state of loneliness. Her conversations with herself are filled with thoughts of being unwanted, and life reflects it by keeping her isolated. When she dares to assume the state of love, she feels cherished and complete within. Though she may still be alone in the outer world, she refuses to yield to the old state. She walks with the inner knowing of being loved. Soon her vibration attracts companionship, her demeanor draws warmth, and the people she meets mirror her conviction. Life, once again, reorganizes itself to confirm her new state. This law is impersonal and unwavering. It does not favor one over another. It does not question your worthiness. It only reflects the state you dare to occupy. If you assume limitation, limitation is what you will meet. If you assume abundance, abundance will be drawn to you. If you assume health, life will echo vitality. The law cannot fail, for the outer world is powerless to resist the inner decree. Therefore, the greatest responsibility of man is to guard the state he inhabits. Each day presents the choice of which state to enter, and each assumption plants the seed for tomorrow's experience. To live unconsciously is to allow old states of fear and doubt to rule. But to live consciously is to dare to assume the highest and to persist until it feels natural. Once it does, life reorganizes itself with mathematical precision to mirror it. Life reorganizes itself around the state you dare to occupy, and nothing can withhold from you the reality you claim in imagination. The world is plastic to your assumption, ever yielding to the convictions you carry. To occupy the state of your desire is to command the very structure of reality, for reality has no choice but to obey the inner law. Once you understand this, you cease struggling with outer conditions, and instead direct your energy toward mastering the inner state. For when the state changes, everything must change, and life, in its infinite wisdom, will rearrange itself in perfect harmony with the truth you have dared to claim.